typically, men are like a blowtorch. All they need is a spark, and they're ready.
Did we talk about this the last time?
Oh, we did. And the women are like charcoal?
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Good. Okay.
I think you mentioned all of this before.
Okay, sorry. All right. So let's get into the notes. Last time we were together, we talked about intimacy. And I hope that that excited you about growing in this amazing journey of intimacy. You know, as Connie and I look back over our marriage, one thing that strikes me, after about the first 6 years, we didn't really experience a lot of intimacy other than the physical intimacy. We had a lot of growing up to do. And once we had a couple of breakthroughs, one was me learning how to walk by the Spirit, and another was us learning to accept each other for who we were. From that time on, we have always approached life as a team. And so there were times when I vocationally went through very dark times, and knowing that Connie was there, not blaming me for these things going wrong, but on my side and helping to encourage and to move me forward through those, she was an amazing support to get me through that time. There are times when she's gone through difficulties, and I've been on her side. So we throughout our years, have always approached the great times and the terrible times as a team. And now we're a little older. We don't have quite as many demands on our life, and the greatest joy of my life is growing old with Connie. Our kids are gone. We don't have 1/10 the time with them that we did when they were young. The time we have is sweet and it's wonderful, but I'll tell you what is the joy of my life is the fact that I'm walking with Jesus, and two, I have a partner who's on my team. So that's the joy of intimacy. So tonight, our lesson is called kind of sailing through troubled waters. And you would think that, okay, once you get the intimacy thing down, you just cruise through life and everything's great. Life doesn't work that way. And you all are old enough to know that by now, even the youngest of you, that Jesus said, in this world you'll have tribulation. And the biggest challenge is not, can we establish intimacy? Quite frankly, the biggest challenge is, can we maintain and grow in intimacy through all of these things we have to navigate? Got a bunch of icebergs showing up. So let's just talk about these. The icebergs of our marriage relationship, children. By the way, those of you who have 3 and 1 year old and 4 and 2 newborns, that is rated as the lowest time of marital satisfaction for almost every couple, because your energy level is stripped down by 30%. The sexual relationship is more difficult because, quite frankly, because the wife is more exhausted most of the time. And there's a lot of things that are starting to demand your wife's attention that's not you as a husband. And if you've been used to that, that takes a little getting used to. So there are a lot of challenges with children. They can be overcome, but they require an intentionality of how do we adjust our relationship in light of children. Second is major decisions. When you think about moving, notice a lot of people in California, so you have these kind of decisions, taking a new job, how are we going to school our children, all of these kind of what I would call life-altering decisions. Those can have a difficult impact on your intimacy. The third is sickness, accidents, tragedies, disappointments, and loss. This is one thing I've discovered. And how many of you have lost your parents? Was that a difficult time for you? For me, it was interesting because my dad was 80, what was he? Mid-80s. And what was sad for me was not his death, but his dying. I don't know if that makes any sense, but just seeing the falling away of function and all of these kind of things and the difficulties he went through. Quite frankly, when he died, it was almost a release and a blessing for him and for us. Connie lost her mom, what, 3 years ago? And so, how was that for you?
Well, it was very demanding time period on my life and in our marriage. I spent a lot of time pre-death, just
Her mom lived in Long Beach.
her last year, so I spent a lot of hours on the road and with her, away from the
Us?
family. Yeah. So just that whole process, and then following it, I was the executor of her estate, so there was a whole lot of
Junk.
time and energy towards that. So there was a lot involved besides just the loss.
How about some of the rest of you? How did loss affect you as a person? The loss of your parents or yeah. Just so everybody can hear you.
So she's my twin. So we lost our mom. It's been 6 years. And so we were pretty young when it happened. And I would say the initial loss it was very sudden. So that was like very traumatic for us and definitely affected both of our husbands and our whole families. And then I'd say, like, once we got through that hump of just the sadness, I'd say it still affects our marriage because I think the emotions just still come up when it's unexpected. And so I'm sure it's been very challenging for Grant of, initially not knowing, like, he was sad, we're all sad, and so how does he support me through it, And I'd say it did change me, so I'm sure he had to kind of adjust to that. And yeah, I think it never really goes away. So I think the sadness just comes up out of nowhere, like you see someone else lose someone and it hits you more than it ever did. So, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah.
Lost my mom in 2006. Excuse me. And it was a little tougher to look back at it. I wasn't a believer at the time. My mom had gotten sick and passed within 28 days of being sick and diagnosed. I was going through a tough time. My ex-wife now told me about a month later that she didn't love me anymore. And then about a month after that, I was diagnosed with cancer as well. And I wasn't a believer at the time. So it was, wow. Not until Mother's Day the following year that it hit me that my mom had passed because there was so much going on. It was just a really tough time. But looking back, I realized that even though I wasn't walking with God, He was always there with me. And that was, it's powerful to this day. So.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
It was also a hard time for me because I lost my parents within a month. And they were far. They were in the Philippines. And it was very hard for Tanny too because he considered them his parents. He didn't really have. Yes, because he didn't he said he just felt like he had a family when he met my parents. He finally had a family kind of thing. So we were both grieving, but I felt like that grieving process really brought us closer because there were times when I felt like, just I don't talk to me, but just be in the same room with me. I just don't want to be alone, but I can't talk to anybody right now. But and he would do that, you know, because just the difference of grieving and the understanding that you do that, it really brought us closer.
That's awesome. Anybody else? You know, one of the big problems of loss is we all grieve differently. Have you noticed that? Some of us just have a big sob, a cry, and we're on with life. Others of us process things sometimes over months, and for the spouse, it can get frustrating because he or she is saying, "Hey, when are you going to get over this? Let's get on with life." And grief takes time. In fact, we're going to talk next week a little bit about how do you deal with loss as a couple in a way that is going to enhance your intimacy, not kind of put you on separate but equal paths, if you know what I mean. So those inappropriate relationships can obviously can really wound a marriage, sometimes beyond repair. But I've found that typically after an inappropriate relationship, if the marriage lasts, it takes about 1.5 years to bring healing to that. It's a long process. And then just the normal life stuff of focusing on money, career, kids' achievements, all of these things, what happens is as husband and wife, your focus starts moving outward, and this is where we see couples who share, I don't know what happened, we just grew apart. And that's when you've allowed the circumstances of life to basically take you away from the commitment to intimacy. And that's why I'm such a bug on intentionally evaluating your marriage on a regular basis. How are we doing? Are we moving together? Are we getting closer? Or are we drifting further apart? Because if you wait too long, it gets too hard to get back together. So, how do we establish intimacy? And how do we grow in intimacy? And it comes down to, I think you've all heard it's a cliche, but it's a true cliche, that communication is the lifeblood of intimacy. That if you want to be intimate, if you want to stay intimate, there's no other way than to communicate with each other. Something that I learned that was really interesting is the word communication. I don't know if you've thought about this, but etymologically, it's easy for me to say, etymologically, it's related both to communion and community. It comes from the Latin word communare, which means to make one. So if you think about this, communication is the process that facilitates what God said would happen, and the two shall become one flesh. A lot of us think that's when we get married or when we have sex, that's when two become one. Honestly, Connie and I are still in the process of becoming one. And we saw today that we still have a ways to go. We're both tired from the trip and a little on the grouchy side, you know what I mean? You don't quite have the reserve to... Yes, I will share with you in a minute. By nature, I am a terrible husband. In other words, Steve Larson in the flesh is somebody nobody would want to be married to. I am what you call a little on the high maintenance side, which means I'm pretty particular in what I like. I mean, to give you an idea... yeah, I would actually give her not only what I want for Christmas, but the make, model, and where to get it. And so, yeah, I don't like surprises, and I don't like lousy gifts. So, this all went back to when I was 14 years old, and no, actually was turning 16, and my great aunt, who had never seen me for 20 years, bought me an Etch-a-Sketch. It took me 3 years to get over the devastation of that. You guys don't even know what an Etch-a-Sketch is, do you? You do? Who does not know what an Etch-a-Sketch is, huh? Anybody? Okay, good, wow. All right. So, if you know something about high maintenance people, they can express their disappointment. In other words, they don't just keep everything in. They say, you know, that was really crummy. And so, all of this to say, God had a lot of work in teaching us how to be one. And I think where that comes in is we've learned how important it is to intentionally and regularly communicate with each other. So, under B, communication is how we are going to get on and stay on the same page. It's one thing to get on the same page. I think it's harder in many ways to stay on the same page. Because you guys, and I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, you realize you both are constantly changing, right? Are you self-aware enough to know that? Anybody dispute that they're changing? You are not even close to the same person you were 6 to 12 months ago. There have been things have happened, you've responded to them, and there are ways that your life has changed, hopefully on the most kind for the better. But sometimes, I don't know about you, but I find myself slipping back into old patterns from time to time. And I have to recognize those, and I have to say, no, those are a part of my flesh. I need to get back under the Spirit's control so that those things get rooted out of my life. So, obviously, you know, that fourth bullet point, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Well, in this way, to change your marriage, it is vital that you learn to change the way you communicate.
It's the third bullet point.
Oh, third, thank you. All right. So let's see if there's anything else. We're not going to read all of this stuff to you because this is really for you to take home. We just want to kind of give you a big picture of what it looks like to be growing in communication. So, let's go down to, the last bullet point on the first page. None of this will do any good if your heart isn't all in to obey God and to walk with Jesus on a moment-by-moment basis and love your spouse with His love. My love for Connie is actually not that great because it tends to go up and down based on her performance and based on how I'm feeling. Jesus' love for Connie is always consistent. So when I'm walking by the Spirit and loving Connie with Jesus' love, I can love her even in times when she's doing great, even in times when she's doing lousy, even in times when I'm feeling crummy, I can still love her with the love of Jesus Christ. And this is why, well, let me just ask you, and you can just shout from where you are. When I say being all in to obey God, what kind of pictures does that draw for you? What does a person look like who is all in to obey God? Humble? Good. What else? Surrendered. Selfless. Oh, that's awesome. Because isn't it interesting? Jesus, the first thing He said, if you want to follow me, you must. That's the second thing. Deny yourself. And so what that means is if I'm a Christ follower, if I've gone all in to follow Christ, the first thing that I learned in my life is I don't matter. And more specifically, what I want doesn't matter. And we didn't get that early in our marriage. Connie and I were kind of battling over what we wanted. And it was sort of a tug of war to see who was going to get their way. Once I got this, the whole nature of our relationship began to change. Because our whole goal in our conversations, even when we were in disagreement, is what does Jesus want for our relationship? What does Jesus want for our children? What does Jesus want for the kind of marriage and household we have? And you guys, I know that sounds spiritual and high, pie in the sky. It makes all the difference in the world in how you have conversations with each other. So in following Jesus, we deny ourselves. And what that means, Connie's giving me the get going. Turn over the page. Okay. Oh, I thought you were saying you're taking too long. That too? Maybe that. The second question is, are you walking with Jesus on a moment-by-moment basis? And here we're talking about walking by the Spirit. We're going to spend some time talking about that, especially for men this summer, but this is a practice that will bring the life and power of Jesus into your ability as a husband or wife to be the husband or wife God wants you to be. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. And then finally, are you committed to loving and serving your spouse with the power that Jesus gives? So in our relationships, it's got to be for God, it's got to come from God, and it's got to be through what God is doing in you to your spouse. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about problems in communication. By the way, any questions so far? Anything not make sense? Okay. We're talking a lot. We're going to stop talking quite so much in just a minute. The three problems I see in communication. Number one is the problem of sin. Jeremiah 17:9 says that the heart is more deceitful than all else and is just desperately sick. Who can understand it? Verse 10, God answers that question. I, the Lord, can search the heart. So I started off with an understanding. I can't understand myself. So there's something you need to understand. We lie to ourselves, we lie to each other, and we lie to God. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things that as I was just kind of going to God and just asking God, like, God, what do you want to tell me? That verse came to mind, and then the other one was, out of the heart you do, or something like that. What's the verse?
Well, Jesus says it's not what goes into the heart that defiles a person. It's what comes out of the heart.
Yeah.
And I forget, Matt, do you remember what he says comes out of the heart? Yeah. The bummer of that is when you say something really horrible, you can't say, I didn't mean to say that, because you did.
Yeah. So as I was just kind of like praying through a couple of passages, it says, little children, let us not love in word or deed, but in our word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Mm-hmm. And it said, like, the heart is deceitful. And I was like, God, I am realizing, a lot of the things that I'm doing for Emily is borderline manipulation. Mm-hmm. And as I started to realize it, it was just getting overwhelming, so to speak, where the next place that he kind of took me to was Psalms 51. And I was like, God, cleanse my heart, because I was realizing that, it's deceitful. So I may think I'm doing things out of love, but a lot of it is just lip service. And, how I actually treat Emily is really the indicator if I'm actually loving her. And so that was kind of a heavy pill to swallow over these last 2 weeks, so thanks for leaving.
Yeah.
Without answering my questions.
What?
Said thanks for leaving and not answering my questions.
Perfect. This is huge, you guys, because if we can believe this, it's going to drive us to one of the most important prayers in Scripture, which is Psalm 139, verses 23 through 24. You might want to write that down in your notes. I don't think I have it down there. Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. will pray this on average once a month. And the prayer goes like this: Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. And see if there be any hurtful way in me. So notice what David is doing. He's saying, God, I need you to show me my heart. I need you to explain my anxious thoughts to me. And I need you to show me the hurtful ways in my life. So it's basically heart, head, and hands. David is asking God to reveal the whole package to him. And then he says, and lead me in your everlasting way, right? Yeah, lead me in your everlasting way. So this is gold, because I will pray this, and then I will shut up with my journal in hand. And I will just give God time to reveal me to me. And this has resulted in so many powerful changes in my life over the years. I keep coming back to it because I keep wanting to know, God, what's the next step in my life that you want to change? It's now a year ago, I was asking God this, and he took me to James 3:13 through 18. And he revealed that my search for wisdom was stunted because I had allowed a selfish ambition to creep into my life. And I'm ashamed to admit this at my age, that I'm still got so huge areas that I have to work on. But I was going out on mission trips with other guys my age. We're guys who had been pastors all our lives and now are teaching teachers. And I'm an evaluator, you know what I mean? He could have done that a little better. You know, that was okay, but he did this. And I realized that was my selfish and sinful competitiveness with them, that was rather than driving me to encourage them, was driving me to evaluate them. Now, that's horrible. You should work that out when you're 20 or something. For me to have that in my life is just, but it was devastating for me to realize that. But at the same time, it was exciting because God was showing me a new way. And so I memorized that passage, James 3:13 through 18, and I started working on this. And on my next trip, I went out with a guy who really irritates me. Have you met the kind of people who, no matter what you do, oh yeah, I've done that and better? And so, you know, and they stop you right in the middle of your description. I mean, it's just really irritating. And so, and of course, I don't do anything wrong, but so I went out with him, and I said, Lord, I want you to help me love him. And so I would start talking, he would interrupt and start talking, but I would listen, and I'd completely hear him out. And then when he was done, I'd say, you know, that's awesome. Tell me more about what you're doing. And so he would talk some more. And we were there together for 5 days. It took about 3.5 days to get him talked out. And finally he said, what about you? And I said, well, you know, I'd really like to know more, because it sounds like you've had some tough times in your life. And he started to share about his daughter who was away from the Lord, and the struggles he was having raising support, and all of these things going on in his life. And we prayed, and I shared with him just the encouragement of what I've learned over the years. And he almost broke my heart. He said, Steve, I wish I would have met a friend like you 30 years ago. Because he never had anybody who was interested in what he was doing. And he'd been a pastor all his life. And it was really shaming to me to realize how much my self-focus gets in the way of loving people. And since that time, I've really, it's been a huge thing for me. So all of this to say, if you give God a chance to speak into your life, he'll take it. But you got to be still, and you got to be quiet, because he doesn't compete with the world. If you're going to follow the world, God's not going to talk to you. is she on?
So I pray this prayer.
Check. I think that was me.
So when I prayed this prayer just about our relationship, Lord, show me, because one of our encouragements to you is if you want your marriage to change, look at yourself and deal with yourself. And that's where the change is going to start with you. So in praying, Lord, search me and show me what's going on. One of the things that he showed me was just I could be so critical and so snappy and irritated with just Steve and some of his just normal ways. But when I would walk with the Lord and bring that to the Lord and ask him to help me respond in a godly way, it was amazing how those things totally changed. I could respond in just a gentle way, not being, frustrated or bossy or nagging or critical or close those cupboards. Why do you always leave the cupboard doors open? Blah, blah, blah. So it's so powerful to take a look at yourself and ask the Lord, show me how I am contributing to just our problem in communication or our struggles. Take a look inside first. And I think that's the key with this problem of sin is don't look at the sin in your spouse, look at your own.
Very good. So this one's off. Yeah. This one's off, Matt. Oh, I'll bet you the battery's out. Yeah, here, take that to Grant.
Don't ask questions.
Yes, I know, it is. So there's times when I know in my mind the right thing to do, so I think that, oh, that's what is the truth. Like, of course I love Emily, or of course I love somebody else. But when I look in my heart, it's like, no, you may not. And so there seems to be this gap sometimes of what's going on in my head, like the truth I believe in my head, but almost as if there's like truth that I do not actually believe in my heart that God revealed. And so I don't know if that's a stupid question or what, but yeah, I just would love to get some insight on that.
There's a percolation process that happens in growth. You learn truth, or you come to embrace truth, and it's in your head. And it's cool that it's in your head, but if it stays there, it's not going to do anything. For example, water that is going to be made coffee, it actually has to percolate through the coffee grounds and get down to the pot to become coffee, unless you're using a fancy coffee maker. But that's where meditation to me comes in. Meditation is the process of slowing down and combining the scripture with prayer, like you were doing. Lord, you've called me to love Emily as Christ loves the church. I don't know how to do that, Lord. Tell me, what does that mean? What does that look like in my life? And then what's cool is as you're meditating on God's word, pictures will start to come up of what that would look like to love your wife as Christ loves the church. Or my favorite one is 1 Peter 3:7. Live with your wives in an understanding way and grant her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. Husbands, if you learn how to do those things, if you learn how to live with your wife in an understanding way, and if you learn how to grant her honor as a fellow heir, so in God's eyes, she's not standing behind you, she's standing next to you as the two of you stand before God. How can I give my wife that kind of honor in front of her, in front of our kids, in front of other people that we meet? How can I do that? I'll tell you, you're going to have a wife who's loving life, because it is so unusual to see men actually respect their wives and verbally do that.
So the next problem in communication is a problem with differences, and we've sort of talked about this a little, and just being intimate and having these differences, but
Did you notice how cool she moved me on?
So one of the differences that Steve and I have, and I think I've mentioned it, is I'm slow to make changes, and Steve is very spontaneous and quick and decisive, and let's do this, and da 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 da. And one of the things that I think in his prayer of help me to understand Connie better, he's recognized that him bringing an idea to me and wanting me to make an instantaneous decision is not a good way to get a good response out of me. And so if he has an idea and wants to do something, he's learned to bring it to me and give me time to process it and not expect an instant answer. And that's one of the ways that he's really seen our differences and grown in how he responds to me.
Right. And one thing that Connie has learned not to do is to pop my bubble right after I share the idea. So she learns that I'm not demanding a response from her. It gives her a chance to process that. So again, you can learn how to communicate through your differences. Other differences are extrovert, introvert. So, you know, one of you will want to go, hey, let's go to this party. I'd just rather stay home alone and be together. And so the extrovert is looking at the introvert as boring. The introvert is looking at the extrovert as always got to be doing something. Drives them crazy. So there's people who are very task-oriented, people who are very relational-oriented. So there's all of these differences that we have that make communicating difficult. When you intentionally point this out and you say, hey, we're different, and you always need to learn to say different, not good, bad. In other words, for the introvert, they tend to be, introverts tend to be the most intelligent people. I'm an introvert, and that's why I know that. So anyway, the differences is huge, and then the final one is the problem of noise. How many of you have young kids at home? Okay, many of you. Have you ever had to try to have a conversation when one of your kids is screaming at the mom or at the dad at the same time? That's an illustration of noise. That's literal noise. I know, that's physical noise, but it's also the noise of distraction. So if the wife comes in and the husband is watching the finals on the NBA and she's trying to talk to him about something important, that's the noise of distraction. So it's important, if you want to have serious communication, to try to find a relatively noise-free environment. And so I bring that up because it's something that gets in the way, and people don't realize it's hard to communicate. So we're going to talk now about what is the path of communication. So there are two things we're going to say.
Check.
Really.
Hey, Dad, real quick. It's me.
Oh,
I'm talking to you now.
I'm talking to you.
Before you move on from noise, I think you talked about, like Mom even said, the literal physical noise of children. I think there is another kind of noise that's worth mentioning, and it's just the amount that we fill our minds with concerns that maybe aren't for that moment and for that place. Whether that's, honestly, the chaos of the news cycle is loaded in our brain and we're trying to hear each other, but there's so many things rattling through our minds. It could be the noise of distraction, PTA, stuff happening in schools, trying to figure out homework, or a struggling kid. I just think noise goes beyond the physical noise, and it might be worth talking about how do we like declutter even the space of our emotions and our minds to be able to communicate properly.
That's a great issue. You know, I like to watch couples when I'm at a restaurant. And it's so interesting to see, often the wife is talking and the husband is flipping through his feed at the same time. And she's just talking as if nothing's happening. Or it goes the other way. And they're
It
texting.
seems like that happened today while we were trying to work on our material.
Well, it was important. It was the Trump trial. I had to catch up with the Trump
It's like,
trial.
are you paying attention or are you being distracted? Oh, sorry, I'm distracted.
So she really does. She busts me on it. If I'm picking up the phone and she says, "Oh, are you distracted?" And I say, "Yeah." and I put it down, and then we go on talking.
But I think one of the things when you're in a conversation with your spouse and you know there's other things going on in their head, they're not giving you their full attention. I mean, it could be their work, there's problems at work, and and it's all just like, kind of like Matt said, it's cluttering your brain, or it's just keeping you distracted. And so how do you, do you bring it to the table? Do you, something's going on, what's going on? Or how do you put it aside to focus?
It's a great question, because the world does not want to be turned off. You notice that they want, they operate on a crisis a day. That's how they keep you engaged with them.
And it's also hard, there's problems that, say, you might have at work, or that you don't necessarily feel like you want to dump on your spouse and bring home and talk about when there's life going on. And so I think that might be a real important time to, actually, Steve's real big on journaling, even to sit down and write out the things that are cluttering your thinking right now, and
Yep.
cast those cares before the Lord, like
Yep.
1 Peter 5 says, and just kind of be specific about, Lord, I need to set these before you because they're interrupting my relationship and my communication with my spouse.
So let me give you two ideas. One, Connie talked about journaling. And by the way, I had just read another article about how important it is when you journal to handwrite and not to type. Because when you're typing, your brain isn't engaged to the same level that it is when you're handwriting. It's amazing what a difference that makes. But it's so weird. I feel the stress going out of my head, down my arm, to my hand, onto the page. And by the time it gets to the page, I'm going, all right, this is okay. I can do this. Number two, I think it's really important to acknowledge the noise. How are you doing? Never say fine. That's a non-answer.
Never say never. I think that's in our communication.
Yeah, but I'm saying never say fine. If you're doing fine, say, I'm really doing pretty good. Say something that acknowledges that you put a shred of thought into that response. Number two, acknowledge what's going on. Like, I'm really worried because, and fill in the blank. I'm frustrated because, fill in your blank. So, especially for men, we don't think in terms of emotions. We tend to think more in terms of thoughts and things and goals and all of this. Try to put an emotion to what's going on in your life right now. I had one guy years ago that I was counseling. I had to teach him what an emotion was. He sat there for 10 minutes and he could not think of one emotion. And so I gave him a list of 20 words. I said, when you're talking with your wife, use one of these in your first sentence and then go on and fill in the blanks. And it really made a difference to her, because she felt like she was getting in connection with him, whereas before she just felt none at all. So acknowledge what's going on. Even if it's the news cycle, say, I'm really worried about where our country's going, or I'm really worried about what's happening in California. I'm really worried about my job. I'm so frustrated about our housing prices and everything going through the roof. Just to acknowledge those things, because by acknowledging, you put them on the table between you, and you can kind of process that.
I know just recently with us getting prepared to go to Burundi, and then Steve did a lot of preparation of what he was teaching, his curriculum. So he was putting in a lot of time, and we were also doing the marriage prep, and so our minds were very focused and busy. And then coming home, he wasn't feeling great, so there was that physical stuff too. And in the night, I was going through my list of all of the things that we needed to talk about, but because I knew he had stuff on his mind, he wouldn't have heard it, and he would have gotten frustrated with me for bringing it up, and
Are you losing again?
I must be taking all the energy out of those, sucking the energy out. But kind of being aware too that of what your spouse is going through, kind of be sensitive to those things to know when it's a good time to bring up issues, and to even say, I know you're really busy in preparing for this, but I need us to find 15 minutes when we can sit down and calendar because there are a lot of things we need to make decisions on before we go or something. But be aware of their noise and give them permission to have it, but then ask for, can you put it aside for a bit so that we can talk?
Matt, did you have any other thoughts on the noise?
Trying to lead the church when there were just a lot of different views, a lot of different struggles, and people trying to navigate through COVID. And our kids were home. We were first-time homeschoolers after public schooling for their whole lives and that kind of thing. I mean, just it was a crazy season. And our kids were of an age that we could actually just start walking. So we just started walking all the time. We would get outside, we would walk and talk, just being side by side, and actually usually the first mile was pretty quiet, of just like letting our brains sort of dump a lot of the stuff that even just in your own house and with access to your kids and your Wi-Fi or whatever, like it sort of builds up, and just walking kind of drained a lot of the energy out of those things and allowed us to hear each other a lot better. I think figuring out what your best listening situation is personally, and then if you get the sense from your spouse that there's something that needs to be talked about, maybe request that listening environment. Hey, can we go for a drive? I would love to hear you, but I'm really struggling right now. Would you mind if we went for a drive so I could hear what you're trying to say, or a walk, or whatever that is? Just even being able to acknowledge this sounds really important, and I want to do what I can to hear you right now. This environment is going to be a struggle. That can be a point of frustration for your spouse, who maybe just needs to say something very quickly, but this is that challenge of communication and maybe the give and take of, I want to hear this and I want to do my best to hear this. And I can try to hear this right now, but if we're going to have a real conversation, it might be best done in another environment. So it is very tough, though. It's tough. I mean, we're raising 5 kids, and right now our house is insane. You think toddlers are loud? Our house is more insane than it has ever been, and our 21-year-old's home, our 19-year-old is a tornado wrapped in a hurricane, and he just loves making plans with his friends, and he's home for the summer from college, and it's just chaos. So trying to figure out how to have real conversations. We've started locking our door a lot, and just like letting the kids like, it's terrifying, but it just gives us that extra minute of like, we can finish a thought before we go and unlock the door and say yes, and we've given them a chance to calm down. So just things to try and figure out ways that we can actually have those moments that we need to be able to talk to each other before letting the kids come in on their schedule. So.
And I just smile and say, now you know what we went through. I remember those days of the kids when they were adults away from home and then they came back for the summer. Have any of you experienced that yet? They're different, aren't they, when they come back? It is not the same. And if you want it to be the same, you're going to be so frustrated. Huh? Thank you, my dear. All right. You guys know my name is Dr. Distracto, and my superpower is distraction. So I can do that. All right. So we got 10 minutes. And what I want to do,
Sure.
huh?
We have 40 minutes. Well, 10 until he wants to do the next thing. Oh, hold up here. Don't hold that.
So what I want to do, there's 2 principles of communication. Number 1 is to speak honestly. and second, to speak in love. Do you see those? And speaking honestly, my definition is going to sound kind of weird, but when you think about it, it's going to make sense. Hopefully, it'll make sense to you. Speaking honestly with your husband or wife is learning to say what you think, what you feel, or what you want. Now, a lot of you, quote unquote Christians, will say, oh, we shouldn't talk about what we want. That's being selfish. The problem is, the only way you can help your spouse love you is by telling them what you want. Now, what we're going to do is I want to give you probably 10 minutes, and then we'll pick this up on the other side of the break. I want you to talk as a group. In fact, should we split them into husbands? Or we'll just do it. We'll just do it as a group. Okay, I think you can be honest with each other there. Why is it hard to speak honestly? What keeps you from speaking honestly with your spouse? Okay, so it's 7:54. So let's take 6 minutes and take some time. And if you have questions about the question, just raise your hand and we'll come over and help you figure those out, okay? You know what we want? We want you to make a list. Should be at least 5 or 6 things on there of why is it difficult, what keeps us from speaking honestly, okay? All right, that's your turn to turn into each other and talk together. Yeah, I think we'll just finish it. So, at 8, let's see, we'll give a break, is that right? Yeah. Okay. And then we'll probably just come back and take that up, and then we're going to talk about the loving communication. And we might even close just with a couple of things that asked me to let it go.
Yeah, just a reminder, aiming for 8:30, can have a little spillover.
Yeah, I don't want to do too much stuff.
That's great. Do you guys want stools? You're looking a little like it feels better to sit down than stand up.
Well, yeah, I'm not tired. I was just sitting down to get a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the if you hold it down on the lower half, it adjusts stuff.
You're like Steve Jobs. You're holding it wrong. Did you know the lawsuit for that is still going on?
Oh my goodness. I get a $3 check every once in a while.
Yeah.
I'm going to run down and check on Rosie real quick.
Okay.
She's in childcare. So do you want to bring her back from, or do you want me to do it as soon as I get back? I won't be long.
Okay, either way.
Okay. physically see her and see how she's doing. 8 to 10. Do you want to do the feedback after a quick break or before?
Why don't we do some feedback first for the break, and then we'll.
You guys can just grab feedback.
Go for it now.
Okay, how we doing? Okay, I'm going to go table by table, ask you for your feedback. So, what did you guys come up with? Spokesman?
I don't know. I think we're kind of processing through it. There's so many dynamics to, I think just the differences between two people, like we alluded to earlier. And so even just overcoming the perception of what this person is going to think, say, feel, respond when I say something that I have a perception of what they're going to do. It's, you know, Chris mentioned that sometimes it just takes a lot of effort to get to that point of being willing to say the thing that is on your heart.
Fear of inertia.
Yeah, for sure.
Where is this going to go? How are they going to respond?
Yeah, or even like at the end of the day, it's like, wow, this is just not the day. We're worn out. Tomorrow, like you just keep pushing it off because you know I just don't have the energy to do that right now.
That's great. How about you guys?
I mean, pretty similar. We talked about it as a group, but I think a couple of the other things were, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. I don't want to get hurt. I don't really know what I want, which is you kind of said a second ago. So I don't know what to say, to be honest about this in the moment. So things like that.
That's great. How about you guys?
Hi, Connie.
Take one down and pass it around.
Let's see. I think we said a lot of those things as well, but Sally, what did you write down? I'll steal some of your notes.
I took notes. Amber's exhausted. So we talked about rejection, bad reaction from past experience when we shared things, pride,
I just want to slow you down. That one is huge.
yeah.
I tried being honest, and I got dinged. And, you know, fool me once, shame on you, or how does it go? Fool me twice, shame on me. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
One other thing on that, do you feel like that is just in relationship, or do you feel like externally as well?
It's all over. You guys know we are not a truth-telling culture.
Yeah.
Average American lies 200 times every day. We are liars. I don't know if any of you have watched the show House. His famous line is, "Everybody lies." And he's absolutely right. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Wow. Embarrassment or shame about what you have to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually taking the time to think through how you're feeling,
Absolutely.
that it feels awkward.
Yep.
And we talked about self-esteem, so pride, but the side of pride, the inferior side of pride where you don't feel like you're worth it.
Yep.
Yeah, so not valuing
Those are
yourself
awesome.
enough.
Anybody else at this table? These are great, by the way. Okay, let's go to this table. You're elected, huh?
Okay, here we go. Couple ones that were different for us that we talked about. We had some of the similar ones, but they were a different style of how you deal with your emotions, meaning some people are more confrontational, some people are more withdrawing. So if you think you're going to withdraw, that keeps you from being honest, or if your partner is going to withdraw, that keeps you from being honest. Fear of hurting somebody's feelings, that was one we talked about. A lack of intimacy in the first place keeps you from being honest, which was great.
It's great because the lack of intimacy keeps you from being honest, but being honest, not being honest keeps you from getting intimate. So
Yeah,
it's a vicious cycle.
yeah, and then just fear of rejection and judgment.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Good.
I hand it to me, Connie. Honestly, we didn't have anything different written down than what everybody else already said, but the thing that me and Olivia like joke about is that when we don't feel like hashing it out or actually getting honest with each other, we'll argue with each other in our heads, like, and just instead of just bringing it to the table. Because if I assume that judgment is coming or that I'm going to catch heat for something, I'll just either like ignore it and just move on, or wait to the last second to bring it up. But more often than not, if it's like if we ignore it, then I'll just argue with her in my head all day, and I'll win the argument, but it doesn't. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter because we didn't actually have the, you know. So it's not. Yeah, it's not helpful. But it's always better, no matter how awkward it is or how like painful it is, to bring something up in person or in conversation, even if it's a short conversation of just clearing the air. It's always so much more helpful than just trying to bottle it up and just wait for the next time for it to boil over again. It doesn't fix anything.
Very good.
Thanks.
Anything else at the table? Yeah, okay.
You weren't supposed to ask that,
I
Steve.
know. He was walking away. I'm like, thank you, God, thank you. And then he looked back. Yeah. But one of the things that I think, you know, keeps me from speaking honestly is if I don't go to God, then I don't know really what I want or what I feel. And so it's like, if I've gone to Emily so many times just in my own head, like, oh, this is how I feel. But then when I do go to God and I say, honestly, God told me I'm actually the one that's been making a lot of this mistakes, it actually does make going to her a lot more easy, because a lot of the times it's just confession. It's like, you know what? You were right. Like, I just really feel like I was actually being selfish, and that's what has helped also.
Anybody else? All right, let's take a break. And what are we doing, Matt? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? 5 minute break.
5 minutes.
So go to the bathroom quick.
All right, why don't you find your way back to seats? Yeah, I think that's great. All right, well, as we get ready to kind of finish with our final flurry, sometimes as we have been going through these nights, we'll just get a chance to kind of have like a midway debrief and just process through like the best way to finish it out. And so I've kind of been just asking my parents to think about what are, like, within this communication realm, what are the things that can really help with breakthrough? What are the things that can really help kind of increase our quality of conversation so that we can actually get to the places that we want to be? I think a lot of times we have visions in our minds of where we would like our marriage to be, and we just have none of the tools in place of how to get to that place. And so that's what I asked them to fix all of us just in the next half hour or so. But really, just what are some of those tools of getting to that place of unlocking the vision for the marriage that we have in our minds and being able to help make that happen? So let's finish strong.
One thing that is very important, and you guys have just been sharing what is probably the biggest blockade of communication. We have busyness of life, and we have busyness of mind. And so, if we were to stop and just have a discussion, what do you think? And that's a bigger question than what are you thinking about right now? What is on your mind? What is dominating your thinking as a human being? To be able to figure that out, we need to, and I know guys, you'll get tired of me. I sound like a broken record. I always go back to journaling. But to me, if I don't journal, I don't have a clue of who I am as a person. I'm just running from event to event, from challenge to challenge, to pressure, and it's the journaling. I'll just slow down and I'll say, Lord. And for me, my journal, I'm writing a letter pretty much every day, and I'm telling him what's going on in my mind and what's going on in my heart and what I'm struggling with. And I want to give you this idea for this week in how to speak truth with your spouse. Actually write down on a piece of paper, what do I think? And then fill that in. If it's, I think I'm worried about where our country's going, write that down. That's okay. If that's what's dominating on your mind. What do you think about your family? David said, search me and know my anxious thoughts. What are your anxious thoughts about your family? What keeps you awake at night when you think of your kids? Or what keeps you awake at night when you think of your spouse? Write that down. What do I feel? What are the dominant emotions that are in my heart? Am I experiencing the peace that passes understanding? Or am I overwhelmed with anxiety? Am I filled with joy right now, or am I feeling a lot of anger going on? Okay, now if I say, I'm feeling anger, okay, what's making me angry? What is the source of that anger? Write that down. It takes courage to deal with that. But we're going to see the communication, the biggest hindrance to communication is a lack of courage. The second biggest is a lack of clarity. Because you're taking the chance that your spouse might reject you. And then the third thing is, what do I want? And a good way to phrase that, if I could see, let's see, we're in May now. If I could see this change in our marriage by the end of the year, that would bless me so much. That would excite me if this, and make sure when you say it, you're not saying it to your husband, if you changed, this would bless me. Or if you did this, it would bless me. No, if the quality of our marriage changed, this would give me great joy. So that's a good way of phrasing kind of what you want.
And I think even while there was sharing about why we're not honest, several people said it's because I don't really know what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling or what's bothering me. And so that's why what Steve's saying about journaling helps you to finish out your own thoughts. We get stuck on just the anxiety or the pressure or whatever, and then we let that control our mind instead of kind of finishing out the thought and saying, wow, if, I don't know, I think one of the things you learn in speech and in, even preparing a sermon or whatever is you need to conclude your thought. You don't just let it start, because sometimes just the start, we get all anxious over it and we haven't finished out, what am I actually feeling or thinking about that? So finish out your thoughts so that you're able to communicate it to the other person instead of just communicating this feeling of dread or anxiety that starts and you don't let it finish.
Good, good. I want to tell you a quick story about a couple of, I was counseling maybe 30 years ago now. They would come in, and within 5 minutes, they are screaming at each other. They're calling each other a effing this and a effing that. I mean, there's just, my ears were on fire. I had never heard language like this from one human being to another human being. It was just pure anger. And, I tried to calm them down. Boom, it went right again. So I did this twice, and I said, this isn't working. And so they came in tonight. I said, I want you to sit here. I want you to sit here. No speaking. There's going to be no speaking tonight. And I said, and I took this down. I said, started with the wife, I want you to write down what the hurt you're experiencing is right now. And so it took her about 10 minutes to write it down. And they said, okay, slide it across the table. You can't say a word, and you can't say a word. I want you to write your interpretation of what she said. And so he did that. He passed back, and she shook her head, and she crossed it all out. He totally missed her. Totally missed her. I said, okay, try it again. Took him 3 times to be able to come close to understanding what she was saying to him. So he slid it across. Okay, now it's your turn. I want you to write down, what is your biggest frustration in the marriage? Wrote it down, same process. We went back and forth for 2 hours. And they walked away, and their entire countenance had changed. They said, this is the first time in our marriage that we've actually communicated with each other. So often, emotions get so much in the way that we can't even hear each other. And so I'm not saying that this is what you need to do. I'm just saying this was an extreme example. But what I'm saying is the clarity that comes when you write down what you want to say to your spouse is amazing. It's amazing. And I just want to encourage you. I know you may think this is the stupidest idea you ever heard. That's okay. I'm full of stupid ideas. So if you stick with me, you're going to hear a whole bunch of stuff. But this, before you get together to communicate, I want you to write down what you think, what you feel, and what you want. And don't get up until you have something down. Then, the second step, and the second step is you have to wash your truth through Ephesians 4:29. Okay, now somebody look up Ephesians 4:29 and read that for us. You got it? Oh, do you have it memorized? It's got to be word for word. Okay, who's got a word? Who's got the scriptures? You have it? Oh. 4:29.
Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear.
Okay. So the word corrupt is actually the word rotten. Let no rotten speech let no unwholesome speech come from your mouth. In other words, you guys, we've got to move beyond speaking to tear each other down. Those of you who have been dinged by communication, one of the things you need to tell your spouse is to say, I want us to be intimate, but I've been hurt. And when I speak, I need you to hear. And if you're not ready to do that, let me know, because I don't want to have too much scar tissue in my heart, because otherwise I lose hope. And spouse, if your spouse says that to you, that needs to be a wake-up call that how you've been is not okay. And so let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth. The second phrase is, but only such is good for edification or to build up. Is that what it's? Okay, so your goal is to build each other up. That means you want that person to be stronger, more ready to face life than they were before. Now, that will temper a lot of your honesty. You know, honey, and this is not to Connie, this is to a husband to a generic wife. I would really love you more if you weren't so fat. Okay, so that is not the kind of speech that is going to encourage and motivate your wife to become the person God wants her to be. So, speaking the truth is not permission to vomit on your spouse. It's discovering the truth, not of your flesh, but the truth of who you are in Christ. What do you think as a child of God? What do you feel as a child of God? What do you want as a child of God? Not I want a new Cadillac or I want a new Vet. We saw an old couple driving a Corvette, and they were both so old they could barely get into it. I just felt, okay, there's a guy who got his dream car, and it's turning into a nightmare real quick. It just cracked me up watching them. But what your flesh wants is not what you want. It's what you used to want. Because your flesh isn't who you are, it's who you used to be. So now, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word that is for building up. And then the third phrase, according to the need of the moment. You know how arguments expand, how you're talking about this and somebody's losing, so they bring in something else to buttress their, and pretty much you're talking about everything and you're talking about nothing. That's why arguments don't get resolved, because people don't stay on point. So there has to be a kind of focus to your thinking. And again, the only way I am off the charts ADHD, always have been. I have no idea how I got through school, but the truth is, if I don't write, I just blubber. And Connie would not have one idea what I was trying to say. So, according to the need of the moment, and then the final phrase is so beautiful, that it may give grace to those who hear. Grace is power. So are you speaking in a way that gives power to your spouse? So Connie could say, well, what am I thinking? I'm thinking that you're a terrible spouse and I'm sorry I ever married you and I'd love to get out of this marriage. Okay, that is not going to be the beginning of a constructive conversation.
Or the end.
Yeah.
Or it might be the end.
It might be the end real quick. But so if she's thinking, my goal is to work with Jesus to produce the best Steve possible. Ephesians 4:29 is how you do it. And so you take Ephesians 4:25. What is the truth? What am I thinking? You know, and it may be I'm very frustrated with our marriage, or I'm frustrated with our communication, or I'm unhappy with the way we're raising our children, or it could be something like that. That's okay. But you wash it through, and then you say, how can I say this to my spouse in a way that's going to lead to more conversation, not cutting off or anger or ending the conversation? And so rather than saying, I'm frustrated with this, what do I think? Say, you know, this is what, and this would come in the what I would love to see is I would love to see us come to agreement on the values that we're raising our child with. That's a great statement that shares what's going on in your mind, that is going to lead to more conversation. And it's revealing something in you of this is what I want, this is what I'm not seeing in my marriage that I'd love to see in my marriage. Does that make sense? Yeah.
But at some point, don't you have to get into the meat of why? And when you start the conversation with that loving phrase, the follow-up question is going to be, well, what does that look like, or how does that feel? And then you have to take that step, and that's where intimacy and honesty comes in. So how do we deal with that next step?
I want you to picture when you're in a conversation with your spouse, there's a fire between you. And you can either add logs to the fire, or you can take logs away. So you can increase the heat of your conversation, or you can cool the heat of your conversation. Does that make sense? In every truth, there's a way to phrase it in a way that's going to lead to construction, or there's a way to phrase it that's going to lead to destruction. Now, any phrase that begins with you is going to go badly for you. Do you all know that? Huh? Yeah.
It's blaming. It's
Yeah.
pointing your finger. You always do this. You never do that. We would have a great marriage if you did this.
Yeah. Secondly, yeah, what Connie kind of stole my thunder, but I'll forgive her later. It's going to take me a week to get over this, but the first word should never be you. The second word should never be never, and it should never be always, and it should never be are. You are. When you start labeling somebody, you are on the road to destruction. Did you have your hand up? Oh, just. It was a very lovely gesture. Yeah.
I have two questions. First question is, I'm a journaler as well. And are you ever concerned that what you write is going to be read, like when you pass away, and then everybody's going to read all the things that you wrote about them, like that you were trying to process through? Am I the only one that like?
Oh no, I have a code for my journal.
Oh, okay, all right.
I struggled with XY23. You know, I know what that means, but nobody else knows what that means, because everything goes on the journal. I mean, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then the real me. So. I tend to code my journals, but even so, My problem is I lose my journals after 4 months.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I journal on my iPad now, because I don't lose my iPad, but it's all password protected. So, but that's a legitimate thing, and my journal is not for public reading. I share parts of my journal with people to give them examples, but honestly, it's between me and God.
Right.
Yeah.
And then another question I have is, like, for me, I'm an external processor, so it helps to talk through things. And so for us, it feels like there's almost layers of conversation until we get to, like, the bottom of what it is that I'm trying to say. And he doesn't usually appreciate that, because then our conversations take, like, yeah.
Okay. Now, two suggestions for the layers. Number one, get a girlfriend. Get a girlfriend. Well, I think every woman needs a woman friend to process things with. Needs to be trustworthy, needs to be godly, needs to be somebody who will hold things in confidence that you can share without fear of it getting all over the place. But honestly, you guys know the stats. Women use an average of 40,000 words a day. Men use about 10,000 words a day. So by the time you're getting warmed up, he's done. All right? Now, here's the other thing I would suggest. Can you layer in your journal? Yeah. Okay. So layer in your journal, but when you talk to him, start at the bottom line.
Yeah, but if no, because I'm not having that processing. Like, I'm not talking through it with someone.
Okay, so that's where that's where a woman friend is so valuable. Honestly, you know, one of the things in our when we do a class focus only on communication, we'll talk about women. If you want to communicate well with your husband, you have to learn to use less words, because men just do not have the capacity to sit there through the processing. I mean, is it true? Am I right or not? Okay.
Less words and less emotion.
Yeah. And I mean, this is really hard because God created you different. But again, part of this is a great communicator doesn't think about what they have to say. They think about what the other person needs to hear.
So I think our time's up. But journaling is also verbal processing. So consider you're processing it with the Lord when you journal, and ask him to help you refine your thinking.
I do find that it helps the process, excuse me, if I'm not listening to solve the situation, but just listening to understand.
Men, do not fix your wives. They are unfixable. You'll make it worse. When Connie and I started dating, she smoked. And I decided I was the Holy Spirit and I needed to get her to stop smoking. And it gave her lung cancer. She smoked so much. So it just creates, that's a little hyperbole. But when I gave up on it, I think she quit the next week. And your lack of acceptance tends to force a person to stay the same. And your true acceptance, when you accept them as Jesus has accepted you, actually creates an environment where your spouse can change. Okay, so did you get did that get specific?
Yeah, I think it was very helpful.
Do you guys feel like you have something to work on? Okay, so this week, you're going to write down the things, and you're going to figure out a time to sit down, and one person speaks to the other person, and then the other person responds after it's all done, "This is what I heard you say," and try to summarize what your spouse just said to you. If they get it wrong, don't get frustrated. Just say, "No, you missed it. Let's try it again." And get it to where you can go back and forth. You get better at this as time goes on. But if I could give you one piece of advice, view yourself as a kindergartner when it comes to communication. You've got a long way to learn, a long way to grow in becoming exceptional at speaking and listening to each other.
If you're listening and you feel like you don't quite fit the gender stereotypes that were just described, I use too many words and too much emotion. Kristen would prefer no verbal processing and just get to the point, and it takes me a long time to get to the point. So, you know, I think I'm the gal in the family. But I think just to, one of my hopes for hosting these times is to kind of finish with this sense of the why. Again, communication can be one of those things that causes a marriage to thrive. It can be something that causes a marriage to quietly crumble. But it is one of those things that is very noticed in the world. If you speak to each other, this is the example of the baseball or crashing the car at the baseball game or whatever the situation was. Being able to speak to your spouse respectfully, to listen well, to even talk about your spouse and the way that they hear you, like those are things that have this unbelievable impact in the world, because the more you get to know people, the more you realize communication is devastatingly horrible everywhere you go. It just is bad. For those of you that are in workplace environments, you know people are poor at listening. For those of you that know married couples that are not getting any kind of help, you know that listening can be an immense challenge. It's something that as we thrive in, it has an impact and can have this ability to draw people into the story of God. God has a path for you to learn how to do this differently. And I know that's what we're all here for. That's why we would want to say yes to this, is we want to be on that path to do this differently. So I just want to encourage you. It's worth the investment, both for your marriage, whatever kids you have influence over, but also the sphere of influence you have in the world. People will see the difference in how you learn to communicate in this way. So I just wanted to encourage you along those lines. Thank you guys for being here tonight. If your kids are here, we'll say don't dilly-dally, but feel free to relax. Eat 4 or 5 more pieces of cheesecake. I don't want to take it home. So let me pray for us, and we'll be done. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for just the gift of marriage and the opportunity that we have to process through how to thrive, how to live in a way that honors you and that communicates your love, your patience, your compassion, your self-control to the world. We love you, Lord. We praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, good night, guys. Thank you. Leave the tables and chairs. We've got a men's event tomorrow morning. If you men are coming back here, it's going to be like this. We'll just take the tablecloths off, and that's it.